picture the scene, right? It's June 3rd,
Yeah.
and it's the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. You've got international investors, massive corporate interests, foreign dignitaries, all gathered in Russia's cultural capital to, ink deals worth literally billions of dollars.
Right. Huge event.
Huge. And while people are like sipping coffee and reviewing these massive contracts, a swarm of 96 Ukrainian attack drones is heading straight for the city.
96.
Yeah, 96 incoming explosive drones. I mean, in almost any city in the West, that sounds like an absolute apocalyptic scenario. You'd expect air raid sirens, mass panic, people
Sheltering in basements, right?
Yeah.
The immediate cancellation of the whole event.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the exact opposite of what actually happened.
Yeah. According to the accounts we're analyzing today, out of those 96 drones, only 5 actually made it through the air defense network.
Just 5.
Just 5. And I mean, there was some black smoke on the horizon, sure, but down on the ground, the conference didn't skip a single beat. People didn't panic. The local population didn't, alter their morning commutes at all. The forum just proceeded, and they secured something like $84 billion in investments.
That's staggering disconnect, right? Between a massive aerial attack and the complete, almost indifference of the population. That's really the entry point for the reality we're exploring today.
Right, because if you're consuming mainstream Western media, the narrative of the war in Ukraine looks very, very different.
Totally different. The story we hear basically every day is one of deep Russian vulnerability. But today, we're doing a deep dive into an entirely different geopolitical framework.
Yeah, completely different lens.
Right. We're looking at a very specific, highly controversial perspective on the war. And this is sourced from an extensive interview featuring Scott Ritter.
Right, the former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer.
Exactly, and former UN weapons inspector. Yeah. And he laid out this massive analysis in a lengthy discussion with Glenn Deason.
So our mission for this deep dive is to systematically break down Ritter's assertions. We're going to look at the raw mechanics of his argument, like how he views the physical drone war, the concept of intelligence dominance, Russian domestic stability, and, what he sees as the inevitable endgame of this whole conflict.
Right. But before we get into the weeds of, hypersonic missiles and orbital networks, we need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener.
Yes. Crucial baseline here.
The source material we're examining today contains highly politically charged content. We are not taking sides. We aren't endorsing, validating, or advocating for Scott Ritter's viewpoints.
No.
And we are not making any moral or political judgments on the conflict itself. Our role here is strictly to act as your analytical guides. We're going to impartially report on the contents of the provided material so you can, understand the structural arguments being presented.
Right. We're exploring the architecture of his perspective, not telling you to move into the building.
Love that analogy. And exploring that architecture is super valuable because it exposes just how divergent these analytical frameworks can be.
Yeah, and Ritter sets the stage for his entire worldview by arguing that there isn't just one war happening in Ukraine.
Right. There's 2.
Exactly. He asserts that alongside the physical war, the artillery and trenches, there is this massive, unprecedented information war taking place across social and mainstream media.
And he claims the West is deeply, perhaps fatally, misinterpreting this information sphere.
He argues this digital sphere is engineered to create an illusion, specifically the illusion that Ukraine has the strategic initiative and that Vladimir Putin is somehow politically vulnerable.
And he's pretty aggressive about this,
yeah.
Right? He aggressively targets the analysts who gild and perpetuate this narrative.
Oh, absolutely. He singles out Gilbert Doctorow as a prime example of what he views as fundamentally flawed Western analysis.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Ritter's critique here goes directly to the methodology of how we gather intelligence in the modern age.
Right. Yeah, he basically accuses analysts like Doctorow of building these massive geopolitical conclusions on incredibly flimsy, anecdotal data points.
Like what?
Well, Ritter points out that some analysts are writing these sweeping articles declaring Russia is on the verge of collapse, but their evidence is based on, rumors heard from taxi drivers.
Taxi drivers.
Yeah, or isolated conversations with real estate brokers.
I mean, he brought up one specific anecdote that really highlights this absurdity. He mentioned analysts pointing to 2 elderly people who got stuck on a hill in Feodosia because they ran out of gas.
Right.
And they were using that tiny hyperlocal inconvenience to extrapolate a total breakdown of the Russian fuel supply chain.
It's wild. You can't look at one broken down car and declare the entire national logistics network has collapsed.
Exactly. It's like trying to evaluate the financial health of a massive corporation, right? Ritter is essentially arguing that the West is obsessing over the company's dramatic PR campaigns and Twitter metrics while he's looking directly at the raw supply chain data and the SEC filings.
That's a great way to put it. And that flawed methodology he talks about extends to how Western analysts monitor Russian state television, too.
Oh yeah, the talk shows.
Right. Ritter is incredibly dismissive of analysts who watch Russian talk shows like 60 Minutes or the fiery debates hosted by Vladimir Solovyov and treat them as a genuine barometer for actual Kremlin policy.
Which, I mean, it's an easy trap to fall into, right?
Yeah.
If it's state-sponsored television, the assumption is that it's official state doctrine.
Sure, but Ritter stresses that you have to understand the ecosystem of television. Russian TV, much like Western TV, is fundamentally a business.
Right, it's infotainment.
Exactly.
Yep.
The producers of those shows aren't trying to provide cold, fact-based military analysis to the public. They want to generate controversy.
They want ratings.
Yeah, they bring on guests to scream at each other about nuking London or marching to Berlin because it makes for compelling, emotional television.
So relying on theatrical TV pundits to measure the actual pulse of the Russian military command is, in his view, a fatal analytical flaw.
It really makes me think of someone trying to gauge the actual fiscal policy of the U.S. Treasury by watching a reality TV show about day traders.
Yeah, it's dramatic, it uses the right vocabulary, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the actual levers of power.
Right. And Ritter leans heavily on his own background to contrast his methodology with those pundits. He claims a 95% track record as a top-tier intelligence analyst.
Right, he talks about briefing U.S. presidents, global leaders, operating at the highest levels.
And his claim is that his current data comes directly from the source. He isn't talking to taxi drivers. He states he's conducting direct interviews with Russian generals, frontline colonels, Duma senators, and leaders of the military-industrial complex.
Which naturally leads to the question.
Yeah.
If he's looking at the actual logistics manifests and talking to the generals, how exactly does he define the reality on the ground?
Right.
Because we all see the footage. The internet is flooded daily with high-definition videos of Russian tanks exploding or oil refineries catching fire.
Yep.
How does Ritter reconcile that visual evidence of destruction with his assertion that the war is securely in Russia's favor?
What's fascinating here is how he reconciles it by drawing a hard, unforgiving line between perception and attrition.
Okay, perception versus attrition.
Right. Ritter argues that the West is successfully winning a war of perception. A video of a tank exploding generates millions of views, creates a compelling narrative of resistance, and makes it feel like Ukraine is winning.
Sure, it looks like winning.
But a viral video doesn't win a war of attrition. Ritter's core belief is that propaganda cannot stop artillery.
Wow.
He argues that regardless of the daily social media narratives, the strategic initiative has fully and permanently shifted to Russia. They are fighting a war focused on methodically grinding down the enemy's physical capacity to resist.
Okay, so let's dig into the actual mechanics of how that grind happens, particularly regarding the defining weapon of this conflict, the drone.
Yeah, the drone war.
We're seeing a revolution in warfare right now with these first-person view, or FPV, drones. They seem to be everywhere, neutralizing multi-million-dollar equipment.
But Ritter approaches the drone war from a deeply technical, almost metallurgical standpoint.
Metallurgical?
Yeah. We have to go back to his experience in St. Petersburg to understand his framing. When those 96 drones attacked, it wasn't just that 91 were shot down. It was the complete lack of psychological impact.
Right, the lack of panic.
Exactly. The terror aspect, which is a massive component of strategic bombing, was a non-factor. But Ritter doesn't just base his analysis on safe conferences in St. Petersburg. He actually traveled down directly into the combat zones.
Yeah, specifically to places like Lugansk and Starobelsk. And down there, he acknowledges the reality is incredibly deadly.
The air raid sirens are constant.
Yeah, and he specifically details the threat of the Ukrainian Hornet drones. And the background on these Hornets is fascinating because it's a perfect example of modern privatized military tech.
Oh, absolutely.
Ritter claims these specific drones are built by a company funded by Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, and that they integrate Starlink satellite connectivity and artificial intelligence to acquire targets.
And he does not downplay their lethality on a tactical level. Like, he recounts a deeply tragic incident where 21 students in Starobelsk were killed by drone strikes.
Awful.
He even describes his own convoy being directly targeted by these Hornet drones, which forced his security detail to rapidly evacuate him.
So he's openly acknowledging that Ukrainian drone operators are highly skilled and the Western tech backing them is lethal.
Right. But then he immediately pivots to the Russian strategic response to that lethality. And this is where his interviews come into play. He speaks with Dmitry Rogozin.
Okay, for context, Rogozin is a major figure in Russia.
Very major.
He used to be the head of Roscosmos, the equivalent of NASA, and now he's commanding a drone brigade and running a specialized technology center on the front lines.
And Ritter's conversation with Rogozin reveals a highly clinical approach to this technological arms race. Rogozin openly admits that the Ukrainian operators are good. There's no denial.
Right.
But the Russian military apparatus approaches it like an engineering puzzle. Rogozin claims that the moment a new Western drone, like the Hornet, is introduced, the Russian forces recover the debris.
They could just go pick it up?
Yeah, they immediately send it to frontline tech centers where engineers reverse engineer the circuitry, figure out what frequencies it uses, how its AI recognizes targets, and they instantly develop countermeasures.
So it's this rapid iteration cycle.
Yeah.
Ukraine fields a new technology, Russia captures it, dissects it, and neutralizes the advantage.
Exactly.
But where Ritter gets incredibly specific, and frankly where his analysis diverges most violently from the Western consensus, is his breakdown of the Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil refineries.
Right. This has been a massive storyline in the West. We constantly see headlines declaring that Ukrainian long-range drones are crippling Russia's oil infrastructure.
Which is the lifeblood of their economy.
Right. But Ritter calls this the pot versus boom argument.
Yeah, the pot versus boom argument. Okay, I want to spend some time here because it really gets to the physics of warfare. What exactly is he talking about?
So he's breaking down the actual kinetic reality of the weapons being used. The drones Ukraine uses for these deep strikes into Russian territory are often referred to as FP-1 drones.
Okay.
Ritter points out that these are not advanced stealth bombers. They are essentially slow-moving aircraft, often constructed largely out of plywood to avoid radar, flying at maybe 60 miles per hour.
Plywood.
Yeah. And critically, they carry a high-explosive warhead of roughly 60 kilograms.
Now, 60 kilograms of explosives sounds like a lot to a civilian. I mean, that will destroy a house. But what is it actually hitting?
It's hitting an oil refinery, and a modern oil refinery is one of the most heavily reinforced industrial environments on Earth.
Right.
The core infrastructure, like a catalytic cracker unit, is a massive, high-pressure vessel built out of incredibly thick, hardened, solid steel. It is designed to contain immense heat and pressure naturally.
Okay, I see where this is going.
So Ritter asks you to imagine the physics.
Huh.
What happens when a 60-kilogram explosive traveling at 60 miles an hour hits feet of solid industrial steel?
It doesn't penetrate.
Exactly. Ritter says it makes a pop, not a boom.
Wow.
It doesn't have the kinetic energy, the mass, or the specialized armor-piercing capability to breach the core infrastructure.
So it just sort of goes off on the surface.
Yeah. I mean, yes, it will cause superficial damage. It might hit a pipeline, start a spectacular fire, burn off some surface oil, and look incredible on a drone camera feed. But fundamentally, it lacks the physical capability to destroy the heart of the refinery.
And he backs this up by asserting that not a single Russian refinery has been permanently shut down by these strikes.
Right.
He uses the Moscow refinery as a prime example of how this plays out in the information war versus the ground reality.
Because the West widely reported that the Moscow refinery was hit by drones and a major unit had to be shut down.
Right, I remember seeing that.
But Ritter counters that by explaining the AV6 unit at that refinery was indeed shut down, but primarily because it was already scheduled for a massive pre-planned maintenance upgrade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And another unit, the Euro unit, was actually hit and damaged, but because the core steel structure was intact, Russian engineers had it repaired and back online within days.
Unbelievable.
So Ritter's critique is that Western analysts watch the fire on Twitter, write the article saying the refinery is crippled, and then never do the follow-up work weeks later to see that the facility is running at near full capacity.
Okay, but this brings up a massive logistical question for me. Even if these drones only go pop against the thickest steel, if Ukraine launches hundreds of them, you'd think eventually they'd hit a weak point or a control room.
Sure.
I mean, if these FP-1s are just slow plywood planes, how is Russia defending a country spanning 11 time zones from them?
Ritter details a layered, highly adaptive defense network. and is driven by simple economics. Because the FP-1 drones are slow and fly relatively low, Russia does not want to waste a multi-million-dollar, highly advanced anti-air missile like an S-400 interceptor on a plywood drone that costs a few $1,000s.
Right, you go bankrupt shooting down cheap drones with expensive missiles.
Precisely. So instead, Russia deploys roving gun crews and dedicated counter-drone units. These are highly mobile teams equipped with heavy machine guns, automatic cannons, and smaller, cheaper air defense systems that literally hunt the drones along their known flight paths.
They just create a wall of lead.
Exactly. And Ritter claims the math is devastating for Ukraine. He states they have lost 555 of these FP-1 drones, with fewer than 5 ever making a meaningful impact on a target.
Losing over 500 drones for less than 5 hits is an abysmal return on investment. But you mentioned the layered defense. Shooting them down is the defensive layer. What's the offensive layer?
The offensive layer is going after the source. While Ukraine is launching slow plywood drones into Russian airspace, Russia is utilizing its arsenal of precision hypersonic and ballistic missiles to completely eradicate the factories producing the drones. Ritter gives a very specific example here. He references a drone production facility in Ukraine that was recently visited by U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. It was heavily publicized, a photo op intended to showcase the future of Ukrainian domestic weapons production.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing the coverage of that. It was heralded as a major step for Ukraine's self-reliance.
Well, according to Ritter, shortly after that photo op, that factory ceased to exist.
Oh.
Russia pinpointed its location and simply leveled it. And that dynamic perfectly encapsulates Ritter's view of the war. Ukraine is trying to pierce a solid steel wall with a slow-moving wooden spear, and while they are throwing those spears, Russia is dropping a precision bomb on the spearmaker's house.
Which perfectly transitions us into one of the most terrifying and complex aspects of Ritter's analysis.
If Russia is dropping precision bombs on factories, they have to know exactly where those factories are.
Yes.
And that brings us to the concept of ISR dominance and the hidden attrition of this conflict.
ISR is a foundational concept in modern warfare. It stands for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
Right.
It represents a military's ability to see the battlefield, understand the flow of enemy forces, intercept communications, and direct their own forces accordingly. Ritter's boldest assertion is that Russia holds a massive, almost incomprehensible ISR advantage that the West fundamentally fails to grasp.
He describes a system where Russia effectively has literal overwatch of the entire operational theater.
Yeah.
And we're just talking about a guy looking at a grainy drone feed.
He claims Russia is fusing satellite data, high-altitude drone footage, thermal imaging, and signals intelligence, and feeding all of it into artificial intelligence systems to rapidly analyze the imagery. He uses a phrase that is equal parts fascinating and dystopian: pattern of life analysis.
Pattern of life is a critical intelligence methodology. It basically means understanding the normal daily rhythm of a specific geographic area.
Right.
The AI monitors this rhythm constantly. It knows the normal flow of civilian traffic, the temperature signatures of standard buildings, the usual radio chatter. The moment there is a glitch in that pattern, say, a heavy transport vehicle stops in a tree line where vehicles don't normally stop.
Or a sudden heat signature appears that suggests a drone launch team is powering up.
Exactly. The AI flags it instantly.
It finds the needle in the haystack automatically. And the response isn't sending a scout team out to go check the tree line. Ritter says the response is immediate, devastating kinetic action. The AI flags the anomaly, and within minutes, an artillery strike is called in. Or they launch a hypersonic Iskander missile. Or, and this is a weapon we're hearing more and more about, a FEB-500 glide bomb is dropped directly on that anomaly.
And we really should define what a FEB-500 is, because it is altering the geometry of the battlefield.
Sure.
The FEB-500 is fundamentally a massive 500-kilogram Cold War-era dumb bomb. But the Russians have retrofitted them with pop-out wings and satellite guidance systems. This allows Russian fighter jets to fly dozens of miles away, well outside the range of Ukrainian air defenses, and release these massive bombs, which then glide silently and precisely to their targets. The kinetic devastation of a half-ton bomb hitting a tree line is absolute.
And that leads to the human cost. The hidden attrition that Ritter argues is the only true message with this war.
Right.
In the West, we focus on the hardware, we count the destroyed tanks or the downed drones. But Ritter says the focus should be on the operators. He provides some extremely grim statistics. Because of this AI-driven overwatch, he claims Ukraine is losing 8 to 10 entire drone command centers every single day.
And the human math attached to that is staggering. Ritter translates those command center losses into human lives. He asserts that Ukraine is losing 80 to 100 highly trained drone operators daily.
Every single day.
Every single day, nearly 100 specialists are eliminated.
You just cannot sustain that. It just breaks the basic math of a military force.
That is the essence of attrition warfare. It's a math problem. You have to replace what you lose. Ritter breaks down the training deficit to show why this is an unrecoverable spiral for Ukraine.
Okay, walk us through that math.
He notes that it takes 4 weeks of basic military training just to make someone a soldier. Then it takes an additional 6 months of highly specialized technical training for that soldier to become a proficient FPV drone operator capable of operating under electronic warfare conditions.
Wow. So you're losing 100 experts a day, but your replacement pipeline takes 7 months to produce a single new expert.
Exactly.
It's an unsustainable mathematical deficit. The physical capacity of Ukraine to fight the drone war is, in Ritter's view, being systematically liquidated.
But there is a massive piece of the puzzle we need to address here. How are these Ukrainian drone operators communicating?
Starlink.
Yes, Starlink. We've heard endlessly about Elon Musk's Starlink satellite network keeping the Ukrainian military online. It has been described as a game changer.
Right.
Ritter addresses Starlink, and his analysis introduces a whole new level of space-age electronic warfare.
Because Ritter acknowledges that Starlink is the absolute backbone of the Ukrainian drone guidance system. He even notes that the CIA allegedly referred to it as a magic weapon.
Yeah.
Without Starlink, the high bandwidth data required to pilot an FDC drone into a moving tank just disappears.
Yeah.
But Ritter claims this magic weapon is failing across many sectors right now. And it's failing because Russia is actively neutralizing it.
And he mentions a specific, highly escalated concept called shredding.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it sounds like science fiction. What does shredding a satellite constellation actually mean?
Shredding essentially means using anti-satellite or ASAT weapons to physically destroy the Starlink satellites in low Earth orbit.
Physically blowing them up?
Yes. Russia possesses kinetic missiles capable of launching from the Earth's surface and impacting satellites in space. Ritter asserts that Russia has the capability to do this today to permanently end American military communications connectivity in the region.
But wait, if they blow up one satellite, doesn't that cause a massive chain reaction?
Exactly. You were talking about Kessler syndrome.
Right.
If you destroy a satellite, it shatters into thousands of pieces of high-velocity shrapnel. That shrapnel hits other satellites, destroying them, creating more shrapnel, until low Earth orbit becomes an impassable cloud of debris. It would wipe out communications and GPS for everyone on Earth.
So if Russia has the power to do it, and Starlink is the backbone of the enemy's capability, why don't they?
According to Ritter, it's because the Russians are not panicked. Shredding the constellation would be a massive, uncontrollable escalation, potentially triggering a wider conflict in space and fundamentally threatening global infrastructure.
So they just leave it alone?
Well, no. Instead, because they feel they are comfortably winning the war of attrition down on the Earth, they choose to use alternative, localized vectors.
Like what?
Electronic warfare. Localized jamming. Russia has incredibly advanced ground-based electronic warfare units. Instead of destroying the satellite in space, they project massive amounts of electromagnetic interference into specific battle sectors.
Okay, so they just block the signal locally.
Exactly. They jam the connection between the drone operator's terminal and the satellite. It effectively grounds the Ukrainian drones in that specific grid square without sparking World War III in orbit.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on Ritter's narrative because there is a massive contradiction in what he's saying.
All right, what is it?
If Russia has this absolute godlike ISR dominance, if their AI instantly detects any drone crew and vaporizes them with a half-ton glide bomb, and if their electronic warfare is jamming Starlink into the ground, how on earth was Scott Ritter's own convoy targeted by Ukrainian Hornet drones while he was visiting Starbelsk?
Right.
How did those 21 students die?
Yeah.
I mean, if Russia has an impenetrable shield of Overwatch, how did he almost get killed?
This raises an important question, and it's the exact friction point a critical listener should identify. It sounds like a paradox.
It does.
But if we deeply analyze Ritter's framework, he is describing a macro-level war of attrition, not a frictionless magical shield.
Okay.
In military analysis, having dominance does not mean you take 0 hits. It doesn't mean the enemy is completely paralyzed and incapable of fighting back. War is inherently chaotic. The Ukrainian forces are brave, they are highly adaptable, and they are utilizing highly effective localized tactics to slip through the electronic net and launch strikes.
It reminds me of the math behind a casino, right?
Oh, yeah.
The house always wins in the long run because the fundamental mathematical structure of the games is tilted in their favor. They have dominance.
Right.
But individual players can still walk into the casino, pull the lever on a slot machine, and hit a jackpot. The house still bleeds money occasionally. The Hornet drone slipping through the jammer and hitting his convoy, that's the slot machine payout.
That is a perfect analogy.
But losing 100 highly trained drone operators a day is the house edge grinding the player into absolute bankruptcy over time.
Exactly. Winning decisively in the brutal calculus of attrition warfare means destroying the enemy's long-term capacity to replace their specialized assets. You endure the localized strikes, you take the occasional hit, while structurally dismantling their ability to sustain the campaign over the next 6 months.
Which transitions perfectly into how the leadership in Moscow is actually viewing this entire chessboard. We've talked about the math of the battlefield. Now let's look at the psychology of the Kremlin.
Right.
And specifically, the prioritization of domestic stability over military retaliation.
Ritter spends significant time dispelling what he calls the myth of Vladimir Putin's political vulnerability. As we mentioned at the beginning, Western analysts have continually posited that economic pressure, or specific events like upcoming Duma elections, might open a window of vulnerability that could lead to Putin's ouster.
They point to historical precedents. They look at how Gorbachev fell, or the chaos of the Yeltsin years, or even the recent bizarre Wagner mutiny led by Prigozhin.
Yeah.
And they use those as evidence that the Russian power structure is fundamentally brittle and close to shattering.
Ritter completely rejects those comparisons. He calls it comparing apples to oranges. He states that Putin's popularity is not brittle. It is solidly in the high 70s, maybe pushing into the 80s.
Wow.
And the reason is simple. The Russian public fundamentally rallies behind their leadership during wartime when they feel they are under existential threat from the West.
Right. But what I found most revealing in this section was Ritter's admission of his own miscalculation regarding Putin's temperament.
This is a crucial, clarifying moment in the interview. Ritter admits that he himself, an experienced intelligence analyst, fell victim to the exact same emotional, reactionary thinking he accuses Western pundits of having.
Oh, the Baltic situation.
Yes. He details a specific geopolitical situation where intelligence revealed that the Baltic states, specifically NATO members, Estonia and Latvia, were actively assisting Ukraine.
Right. The intelligence suggested they were providing targeting data or even allowing drone launches from their territory against Russian targets like St. Petersburg.
And Ritter says he went to the St. Petersburg Forum expecting and frankly hoping for a shoot-the-dog moment.
Shoot the dog.
Yeah, he wanted Putin to step up to the podium, announce that the Baltics had crossed a red line, and order immediate, devastating military retaliation against NATO territory.
Wow.
Ritter even gave a speech at a side event advocating for this exact aggressive response and got a standing ovation from the crowd.
Really?
Yeah, though he specifically notes that the actual Russian diplomats in the room noticeably did not clap.
And that detail right there fundamentally changes the picture. The diplomats didn't clap because they understand the disconnect between the visceral public desire for retaliation and the cold, calculated logic of statecraft.
Exactly.
When Putin actually gave his keynote speech at the forum, he completely ignored the war. He didn't mention Ukraine. He didn't threaten Estonia or Latvia. His entire hours-long address was focused on domestic economic growth, structural stability, and creating a predictable legal environment to secure foreign investment.
He essentially looked past the explosions in the sky to focus entirely on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
And then during a Q&A session later, he finally addresses the military situation. But he doesn't give a fiery, bloodthirsty speech calling for vengeance. He gives a very brief directive to his troops using a specific phrase, "Keep working, brothers."
Keep working, brothers. Ritter unpacks the cultural weight of that phrase.
And it is profound. "Keep working, brothers" originates from a highly publicized tragic event several years ago. A Dagestani police officer in Russia was captured by terrorists. Moments before they executed him on camera, they pointed a gun at his head and demanded he tell his fellow officers to quit the force. Instead, he looked directly into the camera and said, "Keep working, brothers."
Wow. That is incredibly intense.
It became a massive rallying cry across Russia. It symbolizes a stoic, unified society that refuses to be terrorized, intimidated, or derailed from its mission, even in the face of death.
So by Putin using that specific phrase on an economic stage, he is communicating a very clear message to the military.
Right. do your job, handle the threat on the battlefield, but we as a nation are not going to let this conflict dictate the daily emotional or economic life of the Russian state.
And this completely upends a major assumption we hear in Western analysis. A lot of pundits suggest that Russia thrives on global chaos, that they actively want global energy instability and supply chain disruptions because high oil prices pad their war chest. But Ritter argues the exact opposite is true.
And it comes back to the $84 billion. If Putin's primary goal at that forum is securing massive foreign investment for infrastructure and tech development, he desperately needs global stability.
Right, because high global energy prices cause global inflation. And inflation ruins the investment climate. Nobody's going to invest billions in massive Russian infrastructure projects if the global economy is burning down.
Exactly. Which brings us to the legal and strategic restraint Ritter observed regarding NATO. Because if you want stability, starting a shooting war with NATO is a bad idea.
Yeah, terrible idea.
But Ritter points out that under international law, Russia actually has the legal architecture to justify striking NATO countries that are helping Ukraine.
He cites specific legal frameworks, right?
He does. He points to Article 51 of the UN Charter, which guarantees the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's from this incident in 1837 involving a steamboat called the Caroline Link, and it basically established the international customary law for preemptive self-defense. It basically states you can strike preemptively if the necessity is instant, overwhelming, and leaving no choice of means.
Gotcha.
Ritter argues that if NATO countries are hosting drone launch sites targeting Russian cities, Russia meets the threshold of the Caroline test.
But they don't strike. They have the legal cover, they have the weapons, but they hold back.
Because, as Ritter points out, why would you? You have to look at the macro strategy. If you firmly believe that you are methodically winning the war of attrition on the ground in Ukraine, why would you alter the algorithm just to score emotional points against Estonia?
Right.
Why risk an unpredictable, massive escalation with a nuclear-armed NATO alliance when the current geographically restricted conflict is already achieving your primary objective of demilitarizing the Ukrainian army? You don't flip the chessboard when you are 4 moves away from checkmate, even if your opponent kicks you under the table.
Don't alter the algorithm that is producing victory. That is a chillingly clinical way to look at warfare. It, of course, requires immense discipline. But it also requires assuming that NATO isn't about to suddenly alter the algorithm themselves, right?
Yeah.
What if NATO floods the zone with massive new capabilities?
Which brings us to Ritter's assessment of NATO and what he characterizes as the absolute facade of Western unity.
Ritter paints a picture of a NATO alliance that is fundamentally fractured, masking deep structural internal divisions with highly choreographed theatrical summits.
Oh, the summits.
He points out that while NATO leaders stand shoulder to shoulder and smile for the cameras in Washington or Brussels, beneath the surface, the geopolitical tectonic plates are grinding against each other.
He gives some very specific examples of these fractures, actually. He cites former President Donald Trump's past tensions with Denmark over the idea of purchasing Greenland. He mentions ongoing friction regarding Spain.
And most prominently, he points to the perennial, deep-seated animosity between Greece and Turkey, 2 massive NATO members who have historically been on the brink of war with each other over territorial disputes in the Aegean Sea and Cyprus.
Ritter calls their recent unity summits political theater. Because when you bypass the speeches and look at the actual deliverables, the promises of massive financial commitments and joint production of advanced weapons for Ukraine, Ritter argues the timelines are completely disconnected from the reality of the battlefield.
The timelines are way off.
Way off. He says these defense industry investments, the ramp-up of artillery shell production, will take 2 to 4 years to actually materialize. Meanwhile, Ukraine is fighting a war today. They are facing what he calls a dark summer, where their energy infrastructure is being systematically dismantled week by week.
And he uses the promise of building Patriot missile factories as the prime example of this fatal disconnect, right?
Yep.
Western leaders have floated the idea of licensing the production of advanced Patriot air defense systems directly on Ukrainian soil to solve their supply issues.
Yep.
Ritter breaks down why this is not just difficult, but a physical, logistical, and economic impossibility.
He gets very granular on the logistics. He says, okay, imagine trying to build a state-of-the-art defense factory from scratch. You are talking about a massive facility, 60,000 to maybe 600,000 square feet.
It's a huge undertaking.
You have to pour concrete, bring in highly specialized, sensitive manufacturing equipment, establish complex supply chains for microchips and rocket motors, bring in foreign technicians, and conduct rigorous quality control testing.
Now, remember what we discussed earlier regarding Russia's ISR dominance. Russia has 24/7 surveillance over Ukraine, using AI, satellites, and drones. Does anyone actually believe, Ritter asks, that Russia is going to sit back and watch a massive Patriot factory be built over the course of a year?
Exactly.
They will watch the foundation be poured, they will watch the equipment arrive on trains, and the exact moment it is completed and ready to produce a weapon, they will obliterate it with a hypersonic missile.
And from a purely bureaucratic and economic standpoint, Ritter asks the most devastating question of all. What insurance underwriter on planet Earth is going to fund, back, or insure a billion-dollar factory being built directly under the crosshairs of the Russian Missile Command?
Nobody.
No corporation takes that risk. It is a fantasy project.
Which means Ukraine remains entirely reliant on imported systems shipped across the border, and specifically reliant on major European powers like Germany. But Ritter's assessment of Germany's military capability is brutal.
Oh, it really is.
He points out that Chancellor Olaf Scholz allocated a massive fund of 100 billion euros to fundamentally rebuild the German military after decades of underfunding. And Ritter claims that money has essentially vanished into a broken, inefficient bureaucratic procurement system with zero tangible improvement in actual combat readiness.
He heavily targets the German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, who has a stated public goal of raising a 500,000-strong military force to deter Russia. Ritter completely scoffs at this ambition, citing statistics that 60% of military-aged German men flat out refuse to fight in a hypothetical war.
Which means the only way to reach that number is a draft.
Exactly. And Ritter argues that reinstating a military draft in Germany is absolute political suicide. Forcing young Germans into uniform would only serve to massively empower the populist right-wing AfD party, the alternative for Germany.
And they are very skeptical of the war.
Very. The AfD is highly skeptical of the Ukraine war and NATO intervention. A draft would be political gasoline for their platform, potentially collapsing the current government coalition. So Germany cannot politically raise the troops they promise.
But even beyond the troops, what about the weapons Germany can provide? They have sent Patriot systems.
Ritter asserts that even the specific weapons Germany can provide, like the Patriot GMT systems, which are assembled in Germany using German parts, are structurally inadequate against Russia's most advanced threats.
Why? I mean, a Patriot is arguably the most famous air defense system in the world.
Because of the physics of hypersonic flight. A Patriot system is incredibly effective at intercepting older cruise missiles or standard ballistic missiles that follow a predictable parabolic arc. The radar calculates the arc, fires an interceptor to a point in space, and destroys it.
Okay.
But Ritter points to Russian hypersonic weapons like the Zircon or the Kinzhal. These missiles travel at Mach 5 or faster, and critically, they are maneuverable in flight. They don't follow a predictable arc.
Oh, I see.
Furthermore, they travel so fast they create a plasma sheath around the missile that absorbs or deflects radar waves. Ritter asserts that a German-assembled Patriot system is practically useless against a maneuvering target moving at a mile a second while cloaked in plasma.
So what does this all mean? If we put all these pieces together from Ritter's perspective, the picture is incredibly bleak. Ukraine is bleeding irreplaceable, specialized manpower daily. The promised Western factories can't be built because they'll be instantly destroyed from the air. The weapons that are shipped take years to arrive, and when they do, they are outmatched by hypersonic physics. And the countries sending them are politically fractured and militarily depleted.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the conclusion Ritter draws is that Western promises to Ukraine are a lethal combination of delayed timelines and physical impossibilities.
Right.
If NATO's support is structurally incapable of arriving in time, or incapable of surviving once it crosses the border, then the battlefield math becomes an inevitability. The Ukrainian structure, to use an engineering analogy, is taking on a load it simply cannot bear, and eventual collapse is a mathematical certainty.
Which brings us to the endgame. If Ritter believes collapse is certain, what does the timeline look like? How long will this grind last? And what does a Russian victory actually look like in his framework?
When pressed on a timeline, Ritter is adamant about one thing. Russia is not fighting against a calendar. He points out a fundamental difference in military philosophy. Western militaries, particularly the U.S., often operate on political timelines. We need to wrap an operation up before the next election cycle, or before a specific congressional funding bill expires, or before public opinion sours.
Right, the political clock.
Russia, he argues, operates purely on achieving defined operational objectives, regardless of how many pages fall off the calendar.
He actually references history here to illustrate the mindset. He points to the Great Northern War, a conflict Russia fought with the Swedish Empire in the 1700s that lasted 21 years.
Yeah.
He's not saying this current war will take 2 decades, but he's illustrating the cultural and strategic patience of the Kremlin. They don't circle a date on the calendar, they define an end state, and they grind until they achieve it.
And understanding that grind requires us to look at a massive dispute over casualties, which is central to the information war we discussed at the very beginning.
But the numbers are wildly different.
Wildly. Western intelligence agencies and media often claim Russia is suffering catastrophic, unsustainable losses, sometimes citing up to 35,000 casualties a single month. Ritter dismisses this entirely.
He calls it a straight-up lie.
Exactly. He argues that Ukraine and its Western backers are actively projecting Ukraine's own devastating losses onto the Russian military to maintain Western morale and ensure the flow of funding continues.
He doesn't just call it a lie. He points to physical evidence on the ground in Ukraine to support his claim that it is actually Ukraine suffering a strategic manpower collapse. He specifically mentions the TCC, the Ukrainian Military Recruitment Centers.
Yes, and this is highly verifiable. There are numerous reports, independent journalistic accounts, and hundreds of cell phone videos showing these TCC recruitment officers physically forcing men off the streets, pulling them out of cars, or grabbing them from cafes to conscript them into the military.
Ritter's logic here is brutally simple. You don't need to kidnap people off the street to fill your trenches if you have a healthy reserve of volunteers, or if your casualty numbers are manageable. The visual proof of forced conscription squads roaming cities is the physical proof of a desperate strategic manpower deficit.
Which leads directly to the most uncompromising and severe part of Ritter's analysis. His definition of the end state.
Right.
What does winning actually mean for Russia? According to Ritter, it is absolute, it is maximalist, and it leaves absolutely zero room for negotiation. He notes a recent massive shift in rhetoric. Vladimir Putin has recently begun referring to major Ukrainian cities like Sumy, Kharkiv in the northeast, and the vital port city of Odessa in the south explicitly as Russian cities.
That is a staggering escalation. That isn't just securing the Donbas region in the east, that is claiming vast swaths of the country, potentially cutting Ukraine off from the Black Sea entirely.
Yeah.
And he ties this massive territorial claim to the stated Russian goal of denazification. In the West, we often view that term as just bizarre historical Russian propaganda used to justify the invasion. But Ritter argues that in Moscow, it is not propaganda. It is a literal military operational directive.
He describes denazification as the literal eradication, the physical liquidation of the current Ukrainian political, military, and intelligence leadership. He specifically names President Volodymyr Zelensky, the military commander Alexander Syrsky, and the military intelligence chief Kirill Budanov. Ritter states they are, in his words, dead men walking, who will either be killed by Russian strikes, imprisoned, or forced into permanent exile in the West.
He goes even further regarding the territorial map. He asserts there will be no rump state left in western Ukraine. Places like Lviv, which borders Poland and is often seen as the cultural heartland of Ukrainian nationalism, will not be allowed to exist as an independent, heavily armed, hostile entity. He claims every single element of the current regime will be eradicated. There is no negotiated compromise. There is no Korean-style demilitarized zone.
And this raises an incredibly profound question about the nature of modern conflict resolution. For decades, the foundational Western geopolitical assumption has been that all wars eventually end at a negotiating table.
There's always a deal.
There are always back channels, diplomatic off-ramps, ceasefires, and compromises to ensure mutual survival and a return to the global economic order.
Right. But if Ritter's assessment of Putin's mindset is accurate, does that mean all of these diplomatic efforts, all the peace summits being held in Switzerland or elsewhere in Europe are completely meaningless? Are diplomats just talking to an empty chair?
According to Ritter's framework, yes, they are pure theater. Because Ritter argues that for Putin, the very definition of long-term stability has fundamentally changed.
How so?
Stability no longer means signing a treaty with a neighbor you deeply distrust. A treaty can be broken in 5 years when the enemy secretly rebuilds their army with NATO weapons. For Ritter's version of Putin, True stability requires the complete structural elimination of the enemy's physical capacity to ever pose a threat again.
So permanent dominance.
Yes. He is drawing a permanent red line written in concrete territorial annexation and absolute military dominance to ensure the conflict cannot possibly be rekindled in 5 to 10 years.
It's not about making a deal with the structure. It's about demolishing the structure down to the bedrock, salting the earth, and ensuring nothing can ever be built there again.
Exactly.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's try to summarize the massive, unyielding worldview Scott Ritter presented in this source material. We are looking at a conflict where, in his view, the West is enthusiastically winning a fictional information war based on viral videos and television pundits. Meanwhile, underneath that digital facade, Russia is methodically winning an undeniable physical war of attrition. They are doing this through absolute AI-driven intelligence dominance, a stoic economic resilience that completely ignores emotional provocations, and an unyielding commitment to maximalist operational objectives that do not care about Western political calendars or traditional diplomatic norms.
And as we close, it is absolutely vital to reiterate the parameters we established at the beginning of this deep dive.
Yes, please.
This has been an exercise in mapping a specific, highly controversial analytical framework derived directly from the provided source material. Our detailed exploration of Scott Ritter's arguments is not an endorsement of his facts, his casualty assessments, or his moral framing of the conflict.
Right.
Our goal was to help you understand the internal mechanics, the physics, and the logic of his perspective, completely independent of our own personal or political views.
We examined the framework he handed us to see how he believes the world operates. And that leaves us with a final thought for you to carry with you. If we accept the premise that modern conflicts are increasingly fought simultaneously in two distinct arenas.
The physical and the digital.
Exactly. On the brutal physical battlefields of mud, steel, and drone strikes, and in the global digital information spheres of algorithms, PR campaigns, and narratives, it creates a terrifying problem for all of us. You might be wondering how you can possibly know what is true.
Yeah.
How can the average citizen, relying on media that is fundamentally incentivized to entertain and engage, accurately discern the true turning points of a war before the final, undeniable, and potentially catastrophic outcome is reached?
It's the ultimate question of the digital age. Are we looking at the actual physics of the battlefield or just a digital projection designed to make us feel like we are on the winning side?
Something to mull over the next time you scroll past a headline. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.